Speaking of layers, this is the layers panel. Now I know it's a little hard to see because we don't have any layers yet, so I'm going to quickly skip ahead and just make a couple objects here so we can see what layers look like inside of Sketch. So here, very similar to Photoshop or Illustrator, granted it's on the left, but you have layers here. And layers are essentially named like objects. This is much closer to how Illustrator handles layering. And layers can be moved and rearranged. You can also double click them and rename them. You can also hide layers by using this little handy eyeball. Or you can lock layers. If you right click a layer, you can lock it. Or my favorite, I kind of hold down Option, and instead of getting hide, I get lock. So that's a good way to kind of show, hide, and start managing your layers. And of course, you can direct select these from the canvas. So I am in Photoshop, an auto select person. I know people are either auto select people or they're not. But I am. So I'm right at home by clicking things directly on the canvas and moving them around. You can right click any layer and have access to the same controls that you do in the layers palette. But you can also use keyboard shortcuts like you have in Adobe to rearrange these layers. They're a little different though. So here I'm going to hold down Command and Option. And you'll see here that the kind of red highlights change. So that's also a good way to peek at like a position of a layer. I'm going to hold down Command and Option and use up and down on my keyboard. So you see as I press these things, rectangle is moving above and below the renamed layer. Well, similar to Adobe, but still using our Command and Option together, I'll use Command, Option, and Control, so kind of 3 fingers right next to each other, and holding down all those 3, when you press up and down, it's forward and back. So the very top and the very bottom of the layers stack. So again, just Command and Option, up and down, moving a layer around, add Control, and then you're going top to bottom. And you'll find that Command and Option and Control are definitely a little bit more of a Sketch paradigm than they are the Adobe paradigm. So that's a little difference there for you. Now, just like with Adobe, you can group layers. And that's as simple as selecting the layers that you want to group. So here we have 2. I locked this circle. I'm going to unlock it for posterity. Selecting 3 layers, and you can either right-click and say Group Selection, or I like the old Adobe shortcut Command-G, and that simply creates a group, and groups look like folders inside of the Sketch Layers palette. You can name your group. Name Goop, that's no good. Name your group, and of course you can show, hide, and lock groups. Now we're getting to a little quirk of groups, and this is an important thing to know. So groups move around all together, they scale, and they rotate together. But what's a little bit different is if you have auto select on, if something's in a group in, say, Photoshop, you can just click it and a group will expand and you'll have access to it. Doesn't work quite like that in Sketch. Instead, you have a little bit more like how Illustrator handles things, where you double click in and now you can see the group expands and I have access to the objects. Now, if you prefer that not to happen, you can go ahead and set Select Group Content on Click. Now, there's a lot of stuff over here on the right, and it can be overwhelming. We will get to it, trust me. But if I check off Select Group Content on Click, then these things behave as they would, and you can see the Layers panel. Things are just being grabbed and moved around. So, no big deal. If you ever want to get back, you can select the group itself in the Layers panel and uncheck that. Now, as a little tip and trick, If you prefer always one way over the other, you can hit Command comma on your keyboard to get to Preferences, or use the Mac menu bar to go to Sketch and Preferences, and go over to Layers section here, and you can say every time I create a group, I always want to select the contents in it. I prefer to use it the default way, and I'm going to continue with this unselected, but if you really like that direct selection feeling inside of Sketch like you would get in a Photoshop, well, this could be the option for you. For now, I'm going to close that and go a little bit back to our group